It's hard to say, but it could have been very, very ugly. And what I mean by that is the the Trump supporters, MAGA Nation, conservative, however you want to describe it, are I've never seen them. And I follow politics a long time since John F. Kennedy. He was 9 years old. I got in a fight on the football field with somebody because I was for Kennedy, he was for Nixon. We were playing touch football because we had a day off on election day, and we got into a fight over it. So that was my first political experience. But so I followed it closely, and uh, there's a phenomena, in a complex dynamic system, and that is a good description of the electorate and how people think about policy and what they want to do, et cetera. There are these what physicists call phase transitions. It's like you have water in a pot and you have the heat on, but nothing's happening. It's just, it's getting hotter, but nothing's happening. All of a sudden the surface starts to bubble. You get turbulence, and all of a sudden the steam starts to rise. And if you have it in a teapot, it's under high pressure, et cetera. We're kind of in that state where you could go from one stage to another. Now, the Trump supporters have actually been very restrained. I mean, after the George Floyd riots in 2020, that was all Antifa, BLM. It was sort of egged on by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. The Democrats were saying Republicans are a threat to democracy. Republicans are threatening violence, dictatorship, and all this stuff. But you look at facts, like why don't we do facts? The riots in the summer of 2020, Trump was wanted to deploy the National Guard. Democratic state governors refused to do that. Kamala Harris was raising money for BLM, but the Trump side have been actually very restrained. You haven't seen Trump riots. You haven't seen Trump supporters burning down buildings, shooting in the streets, rioting in the streets, etc. But you're not necessarily that far away from that. And I'm not saying anyone supports it. I certainly don't. But human nature being what it is, you can only push people so far. And if Trump had been killed, and he came within millimeters of being killed, that's a fact, it could have set off something like a civil war. We're probably already in a civil war, Julia, but it's being fought, in the courts, in the ballot box, in media and elsewhere. But could it have led to some kind of, militia type violence? I mean, I think that's possible. Just to be clear, I think that I don't condone it whatsoever, but as an analyst, I would say you can't rule that out. We're definitely on a path for a recession. We may already be in one. As you know, the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they're they call balls and strikes. That's the group. It's a private group. They're the ones who decide when did a recession start, when was it over, et cetera. So no one has called an official recession, but they're usually like 9 months to a year after the fact. Like when the National Bureau of Economic Research says, "Oh, the recession started a year ago," like, well, thanks a lot. It's almost over, but thanks for telling us. So we may actually be in a recession right now, but if we're not, we could very well be headed for one. And there are lots of technical indicators. I don't want to get too down in the weeds, but for the past 2 years, yield curves, treasury yield curves, have been mostly inverted, meaning a normal yield curve is upward sloping, so shorter maturities have lower interest rates than longer maturities. If I'm going to lend you money for a month, I want a certain interest rate, but if I'm going to lend you money for 10 years, I might say, hey, Julia, a lot could happen. I'm going to charge you a higher interest rate. That's a normal yield curve. When the yield curve is inverted, the long-term rate is lower than the short-term rate. Now, that makes no sense in terms of risk, but it makes a lot of sense if you expect a recession. Because if you take a 4.5% coupon, 4.5% yield to maturity on a 10-year treasury note, and interest rates drop to 2%, you had a huge capital gain. Like that 4.5% coupon is going to look really good in a world of 2% interest rates. So investors, and this is the big money, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, et cetera, endowments, they'll say, yeah, I'll take that rate. It's lower than the overnight rate is like 5.5%, and the 10-year note was 4.5%. So why would you take a lower rate on a much longer maturity? The answer is that overnight rate is an overnight rate. It could change quickly, and I'm only locked it in for a month or 6 months or whatever. But that 4.5% rate could look really sweet in a world of sub 2% interest rates. So that's a signal that a recession is coming. because that's why you would take the lower rate, because in a world of lower rates, interest rates go way down. Now, what's happened literally just in the last couple of weeks is the yield curves are starting to uninvert. That is and it's not because the longer term rates are going up. They're not. It's because the short term rates are dropping really fast. So the yield curve is starting to assume a more normal upward sloping curve. What does that mean? That means we're in the recession. That means that inflation is not a concern at all, and rates are trending down. Car sales are dropping. Housing is unaffordable. The unemployment report's kind of a joke, and what I mean by that is, as you know, they have two reports: the employer survey and the household survey. One, you call employers and say, how many people did you hire or fire? The other ones you call household and say, did you get a job or lose a job? In theory, they should be the same. Of course, they never are, because the survey is never 100%, but they should be close. They're not close. They've diverged to a significant extent. The employer survey is showing much higher job creation, whereas the household survey in some recent months has shown huge job losses. So one of them's wrong. Which one? Well, history shows that the household survey is usually more accurate, particularly at turning points in the economy. So what we should expect to see, those employment report numbers, are job creation is going to drop very sharply. It's going to go into job losses sooner than later. So the combination of yield curves uninverting, and they were saying, hey, you've had your warning, too bad, now it's here. And the employment report, at least some of them showing job losses, and the other one showing job gains likely to turn around quickly, and some of the other metrics I mentioned, we could very well be in a recession. I think focus on the politics and the Fed and all that. Yeah, and I do too, and you do have to pay attention to it. But the economy is bigger than all of that. I mean, the idea that Jay Powell can snap his fingers and cut interest rates and it's all good is just not true. The idea that the presidential candidate can single-handedly turn the economy around is not true. Over time, yeah, a couple of years of policy and tax cuts and less regulation and tariffs, and yeah, you can over time, but not in a matter of weeks or months. And so my expectation is we're in a recession, probably in a recession now. If not, we will be soon. There is no such thing as a soft landing. Landings are always hard. And there's a lot of reason to think that. The stock, as far as the stock market's concerned, I'm more of a global macro analyst, and I focus a little more on bonds and foreign exchange and derivatives and so forth. But here's what I know about the stock market. People say you can't spot a bubble. That's nonsense. Nothing is easier than spotting a bubble. Just look at charts. Look at the Nikkei in 1989. Look at the NASDAQ in late 1999. Look at housing in 2007. Every one of them is a bubble, and it's easy to spot. What's difficult is knowing when the bubble is going to burst. It's just because you can see the bubble, I wouldn't short it, because you can lose a lot of money being right, meaning it could just keep going for a while, but it will burst. There's what people may not realize, because most people these days, they buy stock indices, Vanguard, S&P 500 stock index, buy it, sleep well at night, just keeps going up. But 85% of the stocks in the S&P 500 are down for the year. 100% of the gains in the index are due to like 5 companies. No, sorry, not 100%. Very high percentage, over 50% of the gains are due to 4 or 5 companies. And we know what they are. It's Microsoft, NVIDIA, Amazon, Apple, and a couple others. The S&P 500 is cap weighted, which means that the bigger you are as a stock, the more influence you have on the index. So the index is going up. People buy the index. The index manager, the fund manager, what do they have to buy? They have to buy NVIDIA, Microsoft, and the companies we mentioned, Tesla and a few others. So what does that do? It makes them go up higher. So this is a recursive function, or feedback loop, if you want to call it that. It's creating a bubble. I don't know when it will break. That's very difficult to predict, but I know that it will break. And when it does, it'll break really fast and hard because of the concentration risk. So get ready. I mean, my view would be, I'm not saying, sell all your stocks and run for the woods. I would say I would increase my allocations to cash. I would have a 10% allocation to gold. Gold's right now today is is near an all-time high, just a few bucks away from an all-time high. I'd lighten up on equities. If I kept equities, I would probably favor the energy sector because drill, baby, drill. I mean, Trump's going to really turn the energy sector loose. Defense contractors, because we're not going to win the war in Ukraine. That's the loss. The Russians are going to win. But one thing we've learned is that our weapons don't work, so they're going to need some new ones and more R&D. So there are things to do in the stock market, but I would lighten up on stocks. Look by kind of 5 years, season to taste, maybe 2-year, 5-year, 10-year Treasury notes because interest rates are going to drop really quickly. Increase your cash allocation so you can go shopping after the crash. And save a 10% slice of gold. I think AI is powerful and will do some wonderful things. I don't question that, but there are enormous dangers that are being overlooked. I've spoken to the top experts in the field, did a ton of research on this, and AI could actually combine with human nature. I'm not saying that AI is not going to work. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying it's going to work exactly as it's designed to do, but it ignores aspects of human nature. So when you combine AI and human nature, this will actually accelerate panics, increase runs on the bank, increase capital market crashes, possibly lead to the closure of exchanges, etc., so that all the traded equity becomes private equity. And then I also have a chapter on national security, particularly with regard to nuclear warfighting and how the use of AI in the nuclear warfighting arena could actually make the likelihood of a nuclear war, annihilation of civilization and the death of the human race more likely, with, again, very specific examples and metrics and historical examples, etc. So, I'm not dissing AI. I'm saying, and GPT is kind of a novelty. It's kind of a high-speed plagiarist. So I sort of discount the role of GPT. I say AI is powerful, but it also has dangers, and I point those out. And then, so anyway, I hope that I think that's very timely in terms of right now AI is just, hey, it's going to like transform the world, bigger than the internet, make everything good.